Good afternoon, and thank you all for attending today's USA Gymnastics webinar. USA Gymnastics has partnered with Darkness to Light and other educational partners to provide the Safe Sport Education Program. In 2012, many of you on this call may remember seeing the Clubs Care and We Care campaigns that hosted similar information and resources for parents and clubs on how to promote safe environments for our athletes. What is now the Safe Sport program and website is now the home for this information. So this website includes helpful resources for parents, coaches, and clubs to work together to promote a safe environment. So today's webinar is a part of National Child Abuse Prevention Month, and we hope that the information shared today will be helpful for our parents, our club owners, and our coaches in learning how each of us can play a very important part in protecting children. So please welcome our Darkness to Light representative today and guest speaker, Carol Hogue, and we will get started with today's presentation.
Thank you, Lakeisha, and to USA Gymnastics for having me today on your webinar. And I want to thank each of you for taking time out of your day to participate. We think it's important to talk about this issue of child sexual abuse, and I appreciate your willingness to learn more about what you can do to protect the children in your life. So today we're going to keep things at a pretty high level, and we'll point you to some additional training and resources for more in-depth information at the end of our webinar. And also at the end, we'll leave some time for questions, so you can be typing your questions in, and I would be very happy if you kept me busy all afternoon answering your emails. My understanding is that many of you come from different perspectives and have different roles. Some of you are parents, some of you are club owners or directors or coaches, or some of you may wear all these hats at one time, and that's fantastic. And I think today at the end of the webinar we'll realize that in each of these roles there's things that we can do to protect children. But also one of the main points I want us to go home with is the fact that it takes a community effort to do this. It's not one person doing something part of the time, but it's all of us doing our job all of the time, and that's what's going to protect children. And we'll break that down into some very practical things as we go into our webinar. So today, if you look at the slide, we're going to talk about what child sexual abuse is. We're going to look at some facts. We're going to look at the size and the scope of the problem and how child sexual abuse impacts victims, how it impacts society. Then we're going to look at who abuses children. Who is the abuser? What do they look like? How do they work? We'll talk about peer abuse. We'll talk about the grooming process. And I don't want you to get spooked by these first two pieces, because we're really going to spend a lot of time talking about protecting children and what we can do. So today you're going to be empowered to protect your children, not only in sports but also in every aspect of their lives, because children live out their life in community. Child sexual abuse is in the headlines. We see it a lot. We see different kinds of headlines at different days. It just depends on what's going on at the time. It might make us feel afraid. It might make us feel angry. And I guess I work in this business, so I'm really surprised sometimes when people say, well, it couldn't happen to me, or it'll never happen here or in my organization. And yet we know for a fact that it's a problem that affects it affects everyone. It's a problem that affects not just some people or some groups, some communities, some sports, some religion. It affects us all. And so we all need to be informed, we all need to be educated, and we all need to know how to take action against it. So we have things that motivate us to make changes, and so when we hear of abuse, then we're more motivated to learn to do something new and to make some changes. We know that most people that work with youth are there for a very good reason. They're there to encourage youth and to build youth up and help them to have a great experience. Unfortunately, that's also because the youth are there and children are available, it's also enticing for some offenders as well. So after all, this is where trusting relationships are forged, things that are special and important are learned, the relationships between a coach and an athlete, among athletes and teams, that's the bedrock of sport. And while it's completely true that most of those who so willingly and passionately encourage and support and mentor youth, it's also true that there are some who do not have those positive intentions. intentions. Although what we do find is that most people do have very good intentions for young people. And so I hope that headlines don't paralyze you. What I'd like for them to do is to call you to awareness and action. And it's a call for organizations to really protect the young people who are involved in their organizations. We know that too many children are abused, and our experts tell us that, which is why it's so important for parents, coaches, and clubs to work together to promote a safe environment. What you'll hear us say, especially toward the end of the webinar over and over, is that strong communication between athletes and coaches and parents can help eliminate some of these situations from happening. In fact, it can eliminate most of those situations from happening, and our experts in the field tell us that. As you look at the picture, these are some faces of adult survivors, and many of them are strong voices in the prevention movement and provide good examples of how you can experience abuse and also move on to have a positive life. The thing that we need to remember is that together we can work to help protect our athletes. So let's move on and talk about what child sexual abuse is. It's any act between an adult and a minor, or between two minors where one exerts power over the other. And I think it's important to stop and really focus on that imbalance of power, because that imbalance of power is what keeps the victim shamed and silent and compliant. And so we've got a power inversion that's taking place. The abuse can take many forms. It could be contact acts or non-contact acts. And so it could be exhibitionism, pornography, communicating in a sexual manner, sexting as we call it, or it could also be an actual contact. Either way, child abuse is a crime and it's punishable by law. It's a form of violence, and there are often agonizing and traumatic circumstances for our victims. So looking at some facts, the experts in the field, and we've actually have references on this, give us these facts. 1 in 10 children will be sexually abused by their 18th birthday. And so if you stop and think about that, child sexual abuse is one of the most prevalent health problems that children face and has a wide array of consequences as well. And so we'll talk a little bit about those consequences in a few minutes. We often teach our children to be careful about strangers, but if you look at the slide, it tells us that 93% of children know their abusers. That sort of changes the kind of conversation that we have with children. So most of the abuse happens at the hands of a known and trusted perpetrator. And they're generally known not only to the children, but also to a child's families. Another sort of surprising for some people statistic is that 40% of children are abused by older or more powerful children. And so it's, once again, you go back to that power, someone who's larger in size or someone who has an advantage over a younger child. The statistics also tell us that only about 1/3 of abuse is disclosed. So 2/3 of children who are sexually abused don't tell anyone when it's happening. And so that makes it pretty tough to deal with, because if we don't know what's happening, then we can't change anything. And so if you think about it, the perpetrator, once again, they're using that power and they're making sure that children stay silent. And that might be because they're bribing them, or it might be because they make them feel loved. It might be that they threaten someone. But there are a lot of reasons that this happens. But it's important for us as adults to maintain an environment where our kids can talk to us. And as adults, we are the ones who can recognize red flag behaviors, whereas children may not be able to. And so with this last comment, it happens in communities everywhere, and there's no one, no organization, no race, no economic class. There's no one or no area where there is no child sexual abuse. So this is why the positive communication between parents, athletes, and coaches is so important. The more a child feels like they have a place where they can talk, an adult that they can go to, the easier it is for them to tell the guardian or the parent when they're uncomfortable or when something inappropriate has happened. And so we'll talk more about this a little bit later on as well. These facts should motivate us to help promote a safe environment for children and to learn everything that we can to make sure that happens, even though that may mean that we're going to be doing something new or different that we might be a little bit uncomfortable with. So we have the facts. Let's look at the impact of child sexual abuse. And these are just a few facts that our experts in the field tell us. Adult women who were sexually abused as a child are twice as more likely to suffer from depression. Among male victims, more than 70% seek treatment for issues like substance abuse or suicidal thoughts. And then there's the economic impact as well. And reported cases of CSA stands for child sexual abuse. Reported cases of child sexual abuse cost $35 billion annually in the United States. That's to prosecute crimes, to treat individuals for illnesses, therapeutic services, all those kinds of things are included in that. So what are some of the impacts? We have impacts for the individual, for the family, and for the community, but some of the health impacts would be post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, suicide, eating disorders, teen pregnancy, academic failure and dropping out of school, substance abuse, or even violent crimes. So next, who abuses children? I know we all have this picture in our head of the creepy guy in the park, right? We've all told our kids not to take candy from strangers or not to go with the person who says their puppy got lost, please come help me find it. Those are things that I told my children when they were growing up. So if you go back to the statistic where 93% of the time the perpetrator is known to the parent, the child, and often the family as well, then we know that those messages aren't going to be very helpful in protecting children. So who abuses children? It could be men, it could be women, it could be older youth. Typically we think of it as just being men, but it can also be women. And the people who abuse children look just like you and me. In fact, they're wonderful, outstanding members of the community, and they are known for their service. They're known for being positive. They're known for encouraging children. They are people, if you will, who are just about too good to be true. And abusers are attracted to organizations that serve and provide services to children because that gives them access. Sports are particularly vulnerable because you have a lot of one-on-one interaction. That coach and athlete relationship is very special and very powerful and can create some wonderful bonds that will teach children all sorts of life lessons. Children automatically trust a coach. They have a lot of trust, and they also have a lot of power. And there especially can be an imbalance of power when the coach holds the key to the player's success or the athlete's success. And the other piece about sports is that touch is pretty common. I'm going to show you how to make a mechanical correction, or you're on the balance beam. I'm going to spot you so that you keep your balance and you don't fall. I'm going to help you stay safe. So we've got that, but when you also think about the parent's perspective, a parent has a lot of power too, because you're bringing your child into an organization to learn better skills and to possibly compete. And so you have some say as well. You have a voice in the organization, and you have the opportunity to have a very positive voice in the organization. And so when we have everyone working together and recognizing that we all have the opportunity to provide a safe place for children to learn and to grow and to excel, it's incredibly powerful, and it can create an atmosphere where children are protected and they're allowed to excel in their coaching and their athletic abilities, but they're also allowed to excel in the relationships that they have. And this is done by everyone working together and having positive communication and an understanding of what acceptable practices are. And so when a student or a child or an athlete is in this kind of situation, then they feel empowered too. This gives them a basis of what to expect and what a proper situation should look like as they move forward in life. Now let's look at peer-on-peer abuse. 34% of children, well actually if you combine the two together, 40% of abuse is perpetrated by older youth on children or older youth or children. And so it's one of the fastest growing forms of abuse. A lot of times it's directly related to bullying or hazing, and all of those can take on a sexual nature. And so where is it happening? This could be in bathrooms, locker rooms, playgrounds, the back of the bus, the middle of the bus, or overnight trips. So when we know where these activities might happen or where there is greater risk, then we can put some policies and steps in place to help minimize the risk. And we're going to start talking about that in just a few minutes. So next, let's look at the grooming process. Many abusers groom not only their victims, but they also groom their families. And grooming, to just define that for you, is the process by which an offender draws a victim into a sexual relationship to ensure compliance and secrecy. And this process is called grooming, and it looks different for different people, but what I'm going to do is kind of walk you through a general idea of what that looks like. So the first thing that it's gradual. We often tell our children not to let anyone touch them where the bathing suit covers them. Well, a perpetrator is not going to go for where the bathing suit covers them the very first time. That's a gradual process. And so in some ways, by the time they've gotten to where the bathing suit covers them, a lot of things may have already happened. But part of the grooming process is creating trust, getting the child to trust them, but also to have the parent trust them as well. And so we're finding that perpetrators groom not only children, but they also groom their caregivers, and they're great con artists and they're great manipulators. And this process can take place over a short period of time or a long period of time. It usually takes place in stages. And so the first is targeting the victim, and an abuser is going to look for a child who's vulnerable, who needs attention, who may not have friends, or who have less involved or present caregivers. And so what I want to encourage you to do is to be present, to make sure that you're aware of when practices are and when they end. And I know that seems like common sense, but I've raised 3 children, and I know what it's like to be going from one place to another and not sure which direction you're headed in. And then to be everywhere on time is also a challenge. So knowing when those practices end and being able to show up 15 minutes before it's over, so that if someone is there looking for a child who's vulnerable, you're that vocal adult who's cheering their child on, and you're paying attention, you're attentive, and you're engaged. That's going to make your child less likely to become a victim. So as the grooming process continues, they're going to start watching the child, getting information, looking to see if there's ice cream around, they like chocolate over vanilla, learning what their needs are and how to fulfill them. And they're also going to, during that time, be interacting with caregivers. They may give a child gifts or special privileges. They want the child to feel loved and appreciated, and they treat them like they're older, and they also try to foster secrets. So you can see where it could be pretty enticing for a child to have someone who's really paying a lot of attention to them, especially if they don't get attention in other places. The next step would be to isolate the child, to find situations or to create situations where they can be alone with the child, like babysitting or tutoring or coaching or, special outings. I want to do something just special with you, kind of making them feel like they have a special secret relationship. And eventually the abuser will work to sexualize the relationship. This part of the process starts early, and they expose and desensitize the child with sexual talk or sharing dirty jokes or showing pictures, introducing pornography, things of that nature. But this process exploits a child's natural curiosity, and it also is a way to see if the child can keep a secret, because keeping those secrets is important. We often talk at Darkness to Light about the difference between surprises and secrets, and surprise is something where we're going to have a surprise party for somebody, but eventually they find out. Usually we want our children to know that if someone's asking them to keep a secret from parents and they're an adult, then that's a pretty good red flag that they should be sharing that quote-unquote secret with us. And last of all, the abuser is going to try to really maintain control of the victim so that they continue to have access to them. And so some abusers take advantage of a situation or relationship to abuse because of their position and because they can. These kinds of abusers are known as situational offenders. The situation's presented itself and they've taken advantage of it. So just a little bit more about red flag behavior. One of the really important things that I want you to walk away with is the fact that most often we do not catch abusers abusing, but we do often, very, very often, find them breaking the rules or breaking policies or pushing boundaries to see if anybody's going to watch or notice. And if someone notices and calls them out on that or holds them accountable for that, then they're going to move on to find a group of people or someone who's not paying as close attention. And so that's where it comes back together with coaches, club owners, parents, and even athletes knowing the policies, knowing the rules, and observing people, letting people know that this is, we're watching you. So it's important not only to have policies in place, but also to enforce these policies. And so, the perfect policy is not the one that you have to go and find in your computer to see, what folder did I put it in, but it's the one where you have 5 policies that are posted around in the gym, and you have parents review them every year so that parents know the policies, coaches and owners know, club owners know the policies, even your athletes know the policies, so that there's a clear idea of what's expected, things that are expected, and things that are not acceptable, so that when that does happen, it's so much easier to have a conversation with someone if you can refer to a policy. And I've jumped ahead to the next slide, but that's just something I really, really want you to remember. With adult responsibility, what does it take to protect a child? Well, it's our jobs. It's our jobs as adults, because children cannot be expected to understand sexuality, all the nuances. They can't read through manipulative behavior that perpetrators have. And so it's our job. Now, certainly children should know about their boundaries, but as adults, we are responsible. And what we're seeing is more and more organizations are stepping up to the plate, and they're creating a new standard of care. They're raising the level of expectations, and everyone in the organization is buying into that process, so that it is a shared responsibility. It's not just the parent's responsibility. It's not just the coach's responsibility. It's not just the club owner's responsibility. It's everyone's responsibility, so that together we can address this issue and keep our children safe and have our children be confident that they will be protected. So parents should insist on policy and also be aware of policy. One thing about it, we may not want to know about some of the things that we talked about earlier. Gee, I really didn't want to know all that stuff, but knowledge is power. And when we have power and we have knowledge, then we're not paralyzed by fear. And perpetrators would like nothing more for us than to remain fearful and paralyzed. So education is a key piece to this, learning as much as you can. So today should not just be the beginning of what our conversations about child sexual abuse prevention. It should be one of the first steps, or one of many steps that will come in the future. It takes leadership to protect children. Sometimes setting rules and enforcing them is risky, and it feels pretty doggone uncomfortable. And yet you would much rather ask a question for clarification or point someone to a policy than to sit back and not say anything and then have potentially something happen in your club. And so, we are responsible, and we do have the keys and can have the tools to do that. It doesn't have to be confrontational if we see someone stepping outside the boundaries. It can be just a very matter-of-fact thing. I saw you do this. The policy says this. Could we do this way that's in compliance with the policy? That's not flying off the handle. That's just making a statement and an observation about something that you saw happen. And so it's very important. One of the things that we also have to remember is that the policies apply to everyone. They're not specific, and they should go up and they should go down and they should go sideways, so that everyone knows the policies and understands the policy, and there are no exceptions. There's no one who shouldn't follow the policy. The other thing we have to remember is that children live in community. So what you're learning today not only applies to what's happening in your gymnastics world, it applies to what's happening in the schools. If you are in a community of faith, it applies to what's happening in your community of faith. And so this is these ideas and the things that you can do, the actions, the protective actions you can take, apply across the board for any organization. And so our kids don't live in isolation, they live in community, and so we need to have protective behaviors that overlay and extend to our community. So this isn't something we're just learning for one group of people, but it's something that can be used by all. So let's look at organizational policy. You want to make prevention a priority. And set very clear expectations for coaches, staff, and volunteers, and communicate those expectations also to your athletes so that they know what to expect as well. You want to have background checks for every adult. The thing about background checks, most of us, well, they had a good background check. Well, we only have a third of the children who are going to disclose abuse. And so what we have is, we have someone who might be on a registry, but we don't know the people who have abused who have not been reported. And so a background check should be one of the things that we do, but it should not be the only thing that we do, so that we have a prevention priority, we have policies, we have a code of conduct. We've done a background check. That's going to screen out some people, but then we're also going to have pretty tight standards of behavior. So and I looked at the USA Gymnastics website, and they have great policies and a lot of really good information that I would encourage you to all look at. But there are policies on eliminating privacy in one-on-one situations. Almost all abuse, 80% of abuse, takes place in a one adult, one child situation. So if we can eliminate one-on-ones and have everything be observable and interruptible, then we're on the right road. Have safe personal and physical boundaries, so that if you need to have a situation where you're touching a child, that you're going to tell them, I'm going to touch you here, or I'm going to spot you, and this is what it's going to look like. Having policies for travel and transportation, and you've got that clearly outlined on the website. So as parents, if you're not familiar with that, go to the website and look that up, because you have great resources. We should limit electronic, social, and out-of-program interactions, so that if a coach sends a text message to an athlete, it should also be copied to the parent. If there's a Facebook group, it shouldn't be a private Facebook group just between coaches and athletes. It should be one that includes parents as well and club owners. And so that you are limiting your out-of-program interactions. So someone who works at the club is not going to be the person that's going to tutor a child on the side with their math. So that gymnastics is gymnastics and school is school, and that you're not babysitting for people who are also in your club, because that's when the boundaries get really blurred and violated. And so it's just best to stay away from that, just so that you don't have any appearance of doing anything wrong. Parents, I can't say enough about parents being involved and aware and really monitoring what's going on, checking with your students. And I don't say that in looking for the bad things, but you want to be looking for the good things. You want to say, hey, I really like the way you handled that situation, or I really appreciate that you did this, so that we're not in a climate of negativity, but we're looking for the positive and we're reinforcing the positive. And all of us would like to be in environments like that, I think. With training, there's some great trainings that are available, and you should take them at every opportunity that you have. We're going to look at Darkness to Lights training in just a little bit, Stewards of Children. But you should take advantage of every training process, and don't think that this is ever a one-and-done situation, because we have to continue to remain vigilant. We have to be diligent in seeing that policies are followed. And when there are training opportunities, there's always something that we can learn. Have a clear reporting process, so that when something does need to be reported, it can be reported, and it's not like, oh, how do I do this, but that it's a very well laid out and thoughtful plan that's there beforehand. It's not something that's brought in on the backside. Effective monitoring and communication, just really, like I said, the positive communication. What we're looking to do in an organization is just to create a positive, protective culture for athletes. And that's done by everyone working together. Together we can make this happen, but it just takes everyone buying into it. And I think when we look at the lives of our children, they're certainly worth it. And these are all practical, easy things we can do. So going from organizational policy, now let's think about our individual responsibilities. So what can we do as an individual? So we want to make all situations safe. As a bystander, someone who might see something and you kind of have a gut feeling, or you see a flag go up, you're thinking, that doesn't quite look right, be willing to intervene, and not in a way that's going ballistic, but in a way that's helpful, in a way that models to your children how they would intervene in a situation if they saw someone who is not following policy, in a way that is positive and would be a good reflection on you and also on your club. Talking to kids is so important. Oftentimes we think, well, we've had this conversation, do we have to have it again? Well, talking with our kids about healthy sexuality and about issues of being protected and being safe, that's an ongoing conversation that really evolves as they grow. And so we need to let children know what to expect. If they're moving up from taking lessons to going to a competitive level in gymnastics, then you want to let them know, okay, we're stepping things up a little bit. It's going to look and feel a little bit different. Yes. So we're going to be talking to kids. We're going to trust our gut, and we're going to teach our kids to trust their gut. We're going to check things out with other adults in a positive way. And as parents, when we're talking to our kids, when we're talking with kids, we want to watch our tone, because sometimes we'll say, well, don't you ever let somebody do this, this, and this. And then they're going, uh-oh, that's already happened. And so we don't want that to happen. We want it to be in a tone where it's like, I'm not going to freak out about this. I want you to come to me anytime with anything. Insist on policy and know your policy. Be willing to take risk to protect, and also to intervene and to report. We have a video that we want to show you about bystander intervention.
With child sexual abuse, we see boundary violations and red flag behavior much more often than we see direct sexual contact. So first, we must notice the unsafe behaviors of people who offend, and we have to trust our feeling that something doesn't seem right.
I think some of the behaviors that fell into the gray area, or the risky behaviors, were things like, he was really touchy-feely. He would always put his arm around me if I was sitting next to him, or put his arm behind me or something like that. I remember one time my grandfather was in town, and he told me, he said, I was really upset. And I said, why? He said, because you ran and sat with Mr. Bob instead of me, and he put his arm around you, and I just thought it was weird.
Through the grooming process, you're facing escalating abuse, escalating violence, and it's being alternated with rewards. Your uncle comes over, you sit on, he asks you to sit on his lap, you sit on his lap, he gives you love, and that feels really good, and then the next day he comes over, you sit on his lap, he gives you love, and that feels really good, but then he puts his hand on your leg, right? Then you go out for ice cream.
The parent should know that they are being groomed. Are they spending time with me so they can spend time with my child? The individual who calls up for the date, takes you on a date, and says, the next date, let's take your little baby, let's take little Johnny or little Mary to the zoo, right? So they start using that parent to get to the child.
I think it's important to see that and to be empowered as well. The next slide is really just an admonition for coaches to ask for permission to touch. And so that happens on a couple of different levels. And I know so when you're doing an orientation for parents at the beginning of the year, you can tell them, there will be times when I'll need to spot your child on the balance beam, or there'll be times when I need to make a mechanical correction and I might need to put my hands on their hips and show them how their hips need to move, or show them what their arms need to be doing, or whatever that might be. And so letting parents know ahead of time that you may be touching their child to help them make corrections and to improve their abilities and their skill set, letting them know that ahead of time, then, and also seeking permission to do that. Is it okay if I do that? Now, it's not reasonable to think that they could stop and ask you that every time they touch your child, but to let them know that as a part of coaching, this is what I typically do, and these would be some of the things that I would do. I want to make sure that you all are okay with that.
We can ask children for permission to touch them. This models that they have a right to their boundaries and they can express what's comfortable to them.
You have to ask permission. Look, I'm about to show you something. This is how the hips need to move. I can show you, and I'm going to put my hands on you right here and right here. Are you comfortable with this? If the answer is yes, you go forward and you do it. If the answer is no, I understand completely, no problem. This is what the visual is if I do it. So there is that boundary.
And letting them set those boundaries and letting them set those limits and then respecting those, because then you're teaching them that they do have a say, that they do have power, and they do have that personal bubble.
And recognizing kids go through different phases. Sometimes they are just into cuddling and hugging, and sometimes they're just like independent and, oh my gosh, don't kiss me in public. And then they're back to, oh yeah, kiss me, hug me, our boys and our girls.
My son comes up now, when he was in middle school, he did say, Daddy, don't do that at school. But then when he got in high school, he's like, I don't care. But there was that point for a couple of years, he's like, man, you can't be hugging on me in public. Now, I couldn't hug him. Just don't do it at school.
Each child brings their own personality and their temperament to this whole kind of boundary issue. Like if they're not comfortable with hugging and they're more reserved, then we need to err on the side of being reserved with that child and letting that child know it's okay. You don't have to engage in a hug. You can simply do a handshake or say a hello.
And also, as you're coaching the child, then to say, okay, I'm going to spot you. And so they eventually know that when you spot them on the balance beam, this is the way it's going to be, and these are the areas that they should be touched in. And so then to allow the child to say, now, if you're ever touched in an area that's out of ordinary, then please talk to me about that. Tell me about that. Or even giving the child a permission to ask the coach, so why are we doing it this way this time? And so I think those are things and once again, as we said earlier, it goes back to communication. Just letting people know, and then if there's something that you got, well, this was different, well, why did we do it this way? That it's perfectly okay to ask that question. So for the parent to let the child know that they're going to support that, and for the atmosphere to be with everyone's agreement that it's okay to ask questions when we don't understand that. And to ask your questions very respectfully, knowing that what the questions that we're asking are for the good of our children and for them to have the best experience with that. And so I think asking permission to touch is very, very important, because for kids, and it may be that you're coaching a child who's already been sexually abused and they haven't told anyone. And so they may have a crazy reaction to a touch, and you're wondering, what in the world is going on here? But the child hasn't really put all those things together. And so just knowing, too, that we need to be observant of someone's response as well, and even explore that later on with them, you know. And so I hope that's helpful, but I think it is just to know, to ask for permission and to be willing to communicate, and for everyone to know that we've all agreed it's okay to ask these questions, and it's healthy for us to ask these questions. And what we're doing when we do that with our children is we're empowering them to be able to do that, not only now, but also in the future in other situations they might be in. So, how can Darkness to Light help? I work at Darkness to Light, and we do child sexual abuse prevention education. And so we have Stewards of Children training, which is a 2-hour video-based training. We have all kinds of folks on there. We have Margaret Holzer, who is an Olympic swimmer. We have all kinds of survivors who come from different experiences and different backgrounds. They share their stories. We have experts who talk about different kinds of things, but they talk about them not only from being an expert, but also from the point of view of being a parent, because most of us wear those many, many hats. Our program is evidence-informed, and so we've had some great feedback and some studies that have shown that what we do is effective, and the knowledge that people learn is retained, and so that's a good thing. 5 steps to protecting your children is kind of the outline of what we teach in Stewards of Children. And the first is learning the facts. And we talked about that a little bit this afternoon, right? Minimizing opportunity, knowing that you should eliminate one-on-ones and that everything should be observable and interruptible. But the fact that policies also are very helpful, and that comes into talking about it. So we want to talk to our kids about their bodies, their personal space, their boundaries. But we also want to talk about things as adults. We want to be responsible adults and help address this issue in community, because we know that when we live in isolation and fear, then that's when someone is able to successfully harm a child. And so talking about it covers a lot of different things. Recognizing the signs of abuse or potential signs of abuse, and then being able to react responsibly. And that's that whole idea of intervening as a bystander, because remember, we don't often find perpetrators in the act of harming a child, but we do see them crossing boundaries and breaking an awful lot of rules. And so if we can hold one another accountable, then it's a good thing. And when it comes to bystander interventions, I think about the fact that it's really an opportunity to learn and an opportunity to teach someone, because often we don't realize that the things that we do might not be quite appropriate or might not always be seen as appropriate. So it's having the opportunity to learn and to teach as well. So that's a little bit about what Darkness to Light is, and we would love to offer this training in your clubs. It can be done online. It can be done in person. The great thing about doing it in person, we talked about solving this issue in community, is that we're all there together. We have our parents there. We have our coaches there. We have our owners there. We have everyone together, and we're going, oh, wow, we do these things really well, but these are some things that we could change and make better. Who would like to step up to the plate to help us do that? And so it gives you an ownership of the process, and it's really a pretty amazing process to watch. I've had the opportunity to facilitate lots of trainings, and it's amazing to see people come together to address an issue, and for people to leave the room feeling very, very empowered about their opportunity to make a huge difference. So our next slide, talking a little bit about program outcomes. So when people go through Stewards of Children, they have an increased knowledge of child sexual abuse in general, but they also understand the prevalence, the consequences, and how it happens. They have increased knowledge of signs of abuse. They have a greater willingness to report suspicions, because they understand that they don't have to figure out if something wrong happened. They just know that they saw something that they weren't comfortable with, and they have a question, and they want that question to be addressed. Really positive changes in behaviors in protective practices that minimize opportunity. And then the ability to recognize and evaluate suspicious behavior and a willingness to take an action to stop it. So it's not just, it goes full circle. Imagine we train our children and we have programs for them in the schools that teach them about their bodies and abuse, and they're told to talk to a trusted adult. Well, imagine your child going to a trusted adult and that adult doesn't know what to do with the information. Chances are they're never going to talk to anyone else again. And so it's our jobs as parents and as adults to be responsible and to know what to do and to do it in a way that's going to be beneficial, to help a child in a way that's going to be beneficial. And so those are some of the things that Stewards of Children and Darkness to Light's programs empower folks to do. Darkness to Light and USA Gymnastics have been partners, and we are committed, Darkness to Light is committed to providing as many resources as possible to USA Gymnastics to allow them to provide the kind of experience that they want their athletes to have, and also to provide them with templates and information about policies, although you've got that all figured out. But we're committed to helping you and to working hand in hand to provide you with the information that you need. And so, we want to provide you education on reporting procedures for sexual, physical, and emotional abuse, and have really provided templates and strategies and toolkits and checklists and all those kinds of things that we can do for you guys. And Lakeisha and the folks at USA Gymnastics know all they have to do is shoot us an email, and we'll be there to help them to do whatever we can to prevent child sexual abuse. But it's important to know that we can build awareness among adults and clubs, and that we can empower people to provide safe environments for children. And as I have mentioned earlier, there's so many resources on USA Gymnastics website that are just awesome, and through the university that they have.
Right. And we'll actually jump to the Safe Sport site. So for those of you who have not seen the site that was formerly the information shared on this site, we had resources similar to this in previous years with our Clubs Care and We Care campaigns for the clubs and for the parents. And now all of that information, along with great new information for parents, clubs, and coaches, is hosted on usagym.org/safesport. So this is what this page looks like here. And if you go here, we have our link for our clubs, our coaches and judges, our parents, and our athletes. So this site has information not only on how to prevent and see signs for sexual abuse, but it also addresses emotional abuse and physical abuse. Here we have the Together We Can, which is our initiative this month, National Child Abuse Prevention Month especially. But this is all the information that you all would need as a parent, as a coach, and as a club on how to keep your staff educated, for parents, how you can recognize these behaviors, and if something is happening with your child, and ways that you can better communicate with your coach and your club and your staff, and club owners as well, how you can make the parents of the athletes that you host feel comfortable in your gym and feel like these things are being adhered to, and these policies that we mentioned that every parent should be looking out for, should be knowledgeable of, that these policies are being adhered to. So we'll take a quick look here. Let's just jump into parents, this parent link. So there is actually a Safe Sport complimentary parent course that's available. It's only a 30-minute course. You don't have to be a member to register for the course. So parents, this great information is here. We have our Stewards of Children, which Carol introduced and mentioned, and we'll talk a little bit more about on the next slide. We have that training available, and we also have articles for parents. So we have articles from some of our other sponsors here, articles on sexual misconduct, again, bullying, hazing, and harassment, great resources on physical and emotional abuse as well. So please get acquainted with the site, usagym.org/safesport. And we also definitely want you all to understand the reporting procedure as well. So we do have a list, law enforcement contacts by state, on where you would make reports if you do find or see any sort of interaction that's inappropriate at your club. We have our cyber line there, and we also have the U.S. Center for Safe Sport. So the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, this actually opened last month, and this center is for response and resolution. So the U.S. Center for Safe Sport will actually have education and training on preventing abuse and awareness of abuse, as well as this place will be the host site for you to report any sort of issue that you find with a coach or athlete. This is where, after you contact law enforcement first, you would contact the U.S. Center for Safe Sport. And we also have an additional contact for USA Gymnastics as well on the following slides, but we do want you all to definitely take a look at the information and the mandatory reporting procedures on the U.S. Center for Safe Sports site.
Thank you, Lakeisha, for that. That's the site that I went to in the last week or so and really explored that. You have so many resources. And I think sometimes we think, oh, I don't want to know that much about it, but really the more that you know, the more comfortable you'll be asking questions and the better questions that you can ask. And so I think you're really empowering yourself as a parent when you become equipped with knowledge. And so I think that's just a very important thing to do, is to take advantage of all the resources that are available to you. So now I'd like to point you to Darkness to Light's resources. And the biggest thing you need to know is www.d, the number 2 and the letter L.org, and that is our website. And it gives you resources if you're interested in hearing more about some of the statistics I talked about today. Those are on there. There are lots and lots of other bits of information, information that's just for parents, lots of one-pagers full of data and information that you can use, things that you could take to your school, things that you could share with other parents. And so it's just a wealth of resources, and we're glad to make all of that available to you. And then, of course, the Recognizing and Responding course that USA Gymnastics has. So we're here to help you and to assist you and to do anything that we can to make your children safe and to make sure that they get to stay children and have a good, happy childhood.
And so here you see safesport.org, which is the U.S. Center for Safe Sport. Again, your first course of action, if you do see any inappropriate behavior, is to report to your local authorities. So law enforcement, you want to first contact law enforcement. Then you would contact the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, which is the response center for all national governing bodies. And we have the number and the website there. And then at USA Gymnastics, we have our Safe Sport program and our website that we just showed, usagym.org/safesport. So you can also email safesport@usagym.org to let the national office know about what you have reported about a specific individual. But your first course of action is to contact law enforcement in your area and then go through the portals with the contact information that you see here.
So if you'd like to know more about Darkness to Light, you can contact our program coordinator. Her name is Catherine Lee. And Catherine can connect you with any trainings that might be going on in your community. And online training is great, but I'm a great proponent of doing the training in person and in community. It's a very powerful experience.
So again, thank you all for attending today's webinar. We will go ahead and jump into some of your questions now. Thank you all so much for attending this webinar. We definitely appreciate your support and your want to get the education needed to work together to continue to promote these safe environments for our children and our athletes. So the first question that we have here, Carol, says that you mentioned abusers often look to be positive, supporting, and caring. How does a coach work effectively with these skills and its attributes without being considered suspect?
I think the best thing that you can do is openly communicate with your athletes and with your parents. Always keep everything observable and interruptible. don't seek out one-on-one time with individuals. And I know sometimes coaches feel like there's a target on their back because the things that I do naturally are things that a perpetrator might do. But we also have to recognize that the majority of people are not looking to harm our children. The majority of people have very positive intentions for our children. And so just staying above board and out in the open. If you take our training, we have a coach in Atlanta who says, you don't want to do anything in the shadows. Stay out of the shadows. Stay where people can see you, and just be open and upfront.
Perfect. Our next question, how can a parent assess without creating an atmosphere of suspicion or diminished trust?
I think one of the best things that you can do is just have that good, open communication. And if you have a concern, address it in a very straightforward manner, and not at a time when you're super upset. Like if your buttons are pushed, that wouldn't be the time that I would ask a question, but to really, and sometimes for me, since I work in this area, I will overthink things, and so I will run it through a trusted friend and say, this is what I saw. Am I overreacting, or how did you perceive this? Just to make sure that you're in check with what's going on, and it may not be something that's pushing a button for you, so to speak. But just to be honest, and I think it's best to just, if you have a question about an individual, either talk to the individual and then talk to the person who is responsible for supervising that individual, and keep your concerns to yourself. Because you may have a totally wrong impression of what's going on, or you may be totally right. And then you follow procedure.
Okay, awesome. Our next question, will every USA Gymnastics member club receive training and standard policy? So that's a question for us, and I'll go ahead and answer that. USA Gymnastics member clubs and all USA Gymnastics members actually have access to these resources and training at this time. So we have offered for our members the U302 Recognizing and Responding course. For the past few years now, it's been offered free to our members. So that is one of the training resources that we have. And we also have, of course, our Stewards of Children course, which is the U301 course that Carol mentioned earlier. So our Safe Sport website as well is one of the resources that we are having our members make sure that they are familiar with, and that they take the time to read and print off all of the great resources there. And for the clubs, I'll share again our screen here so everyone can see some of the club resources. So we'll scroll down. We have the U101 Safety and Risk Management course, our U110 Safe Sport course, the U301 Stewards of Children, U302 Recognizing and Responding, and the NFHS online course for bullying and hazing. And if we scroll down here, I'm going to show you all the Clubs Care Quick Reference Guide. So this quick reference guide, and we have a webinar actually that we did just last year, I believe, for clubs in creating policy that talks about this topic. So again, please take, for our member clubs and those club owners and coaches on this call, please take a look at these resources. Again, these are all available through USA Gymnastics, partnership with our sponsors like Darkness to Light and many others. Carol, would you mind just touching again on recognizing the signs of abuse? That was one of the questions.
Okay. Recognizing the signs of abuse, it could be anything and nothing. Margaret Holzer, who is an Olympic swimmer, said that she was the perfect child. So it could be the perfect child. It could be the child whose grades suddenly begin to drop. It could be the child who is potty trained. This would be a younger child, and suddenly they start wetting the bed again. It could be stomach aches, headaches, a flare-up with asthma. I call them, and I laugh, but I kind of call the kids who are frequent flyers in the nurse's office at school. And usually their symptoms are fairly intangible. I've got the headache, my stomach's hurting, and it could be every day right before it's time to go home. And that could be a fear of just going home and facing whatever they might have to face at home. And so it could be some oppositional behavior. There are a number of things, and of course all of those things don't always lead to child sexual abuse. It could be that but basically what you're looking for is a change in behavior, something that your child has never done, and now they're consistently doing it, and it's been going on for a while, and you don't know where it came from or how it started. And so, as I said, it could be that it's going to be child sexual abuse, but most likely it's going to be something else. You know, I described that one time, and one parent said, well, that could be a teenage girl. I said, yes, it could be, and that's very normal. But you're looking for a change in behavior that has lasted over a period of time. And the best way to open the door for communication about that is, I've noticed that you're getting a lot of headaches here lately. Is there something going on that you need to talk about? Because sometimes our body will, if we're not willing to talk about it, our body will do something that will force us to have to talk about it. It'll make us not feel so good.
Okay, wonderful. So we have, we're wrapping up our question and answer portion here. Again, we just want to remind everyone on the call of the resource of usagym.org/safesport. So we'll jump back to the site really quickly again and just show some of the resources available here. So we have sections on education about the forms of abuse, so sexual misconduct, physical misconduct, emotional misconduct, bullying, hazing, and harassment. And we also have resources for our clubs, our coaches, and our parents, as well as the athletes. Okay.
I just want to say thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate parents taking a stop in the middle of their day to get this great information. I hope you're encouraged to gather more information and to be a more active participant in your child's life.
Yes, and thank you so much, Carol and Darkness for Light, for presenting this information for us. We hope that everyone found this information helpful and will continue to work together to promote a safe environment to protect children. Thank you all for joining today's USA Gymnastics webinar.